Megan, I love you as a person. So I was prepared to like this book, but honestly, I was shocked by how much I love this book. I mean, it just blew me away. It does what I always tell students to do, right? Pay attention to the form and the function and how they work together. You brought all of your talents to the table here, all of yourselves, right? Artist, writer, researcher, feminist, daughter, mother. Can you talk a bit about the form of this book and maybe all the different kind of roles you play?
Yeah, I'm so glad that that form really resonates with readers because this my adoption story didn't come to me in any sort of linear form, and that's always how they kind of want you to write memoir. And it just sometimes there's nothing there with an adoptee information that's available. Sometimes there is information, but many times, as like I try to convey in the book, in this case, most of what I know about my adoption, aside from some facts, which are quite few in the overall picture, is through kind of the scrim of memory and of the stories that like I was told by my birth mother or even my adoptive parents. And those stories can be very veiled by trauma, veiled by just, love. My dad still contends, every time I ask him something about my adoption, trying to seek information, like just raw information, he's always very shot through with this like very romantic lens. My dad's a very like romantic guy, and he's like, "Oh, we saw you and you had big blue eyes and you just were, we expected a skinny baby and you were just, there and big and beautiful." And just that, like, that's all lovely to hear. But when you're searching for that kind of information, you want facts, and they're just so hard to come by. um, and that's where a lot of the research came in. I was a journalist as an undergrad, and so I really like to try to line up facts as I can find them with what the story was. And a lot of times that sent me deep into just a rabbit hole of research, and especially finding this kind of vein of research about adoption, especially in the 60s, and understanding the societal context of what was going on for women in the 60s. You have that view of the 60s being very progressive, and feminists were out demanding rights and whatnot. And yet here was my birth mother being sent away to a home in secret under the great veil of secrecy. Um, she talked about at one point, this subterfuge that her parents put her through. She had to write, I didn't put this in the book, but she had to write out postcards that would then be sent from an aunt in San Francisco, because the subterfuge, according to her, was that she was going to visit her aunt. And so apparently her parents sent all these note cards to someone in San Francisco, and then they were mailed out periodically. I'm having a great time. So that's like the level of secrecy and really shame that was in her life at the same time, as people were in the streets, and it was like the summer of love, and women were actually making some headway. She also got fired from a job shortly after having me for like wearing a pantsuit. Like the, right. So that structure, the structure of like making it appear like my baby book came very late in the process. I'd had a lot of images from my dollhouse in the book, but they were already images that I had just, made for sort of the art project. And it was sort of working, but not really. And then my friend Walter, he read my book, and he was like, have you ever thought of like structuring this like you're like a baby book? And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And so I read some Dickens, and I thought structure was the way I staged the essays, but I'd already staged the essays in a very coherent structure. And so I just went back and started doing things in the dollhouse, and going back to that essay about the Domicon babies, and realized, wait, I made pictures. I restaged those archival pictures of this adoption program at Cornell, in my dollhouse, why couldn't I do the same thing with my own baby pictures? And suddenly I was like, that's what makes sense for this book. Like restaging my baby book photos in this dollhouse, which creates, at least I hope it creates, this sort of added dystopian feeling to the whole idea of adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Mm.
Since you brought up the Domicom project, I would love to hear more about that and specifically how you felt in the archive, right? Like, what was it like in there? How was that for you emotionally?
Yeah, it was really interesting. You know, I went down there. The whole finding of that project was completely by accident. I had I was at a residency at the Saltonstall Foundation and was really jumping out of my skin. I like to say, like, I remember writing to Joan Wickersham, who was my mentor at Bennington, and saying, I just feel like I was there for a month. I'm like, I just feel like I'm sitting in my own poopy diaper. And I just, I was like, is this how I'm supposed to feel? I couldn't, so trying to like get out of my head, I just thought, I'm going to go to the library. And in researching some books about adoption that I might want to read and take out, I found this Domicon program. And so, I just went down into the archives, which is way in like the sub basement. And it's actually quite beautiful. And it was so easy to just request this material. And when I did, I was just amazed. They brought like 4 or 5 boxes out and sitting on a table. I'm not sure if I was supposed to take pictures of them. I'm not very good at following directions. So I spread them all out, and just the images struck me as like, oh God, these children were just like lab experiments. And the idea that a child, the idea that that these babies, practice babies, were loaned to Cornell from orphanages and asylums around the area, and that they could possibly be given back if they didn't work out, and they essentially were fatted and raised and then adopted as scientifically proven babies. Like they're some sort of super children. And to me, I just thought, oh, if there's anything that shows, like, doesn't tell, but shows the bare truth about adoption, it's this. It included erasure. It included like, it didn't include love. Like there was very little love in that experiment, in the way that those babies were, that the whole idea, I found like a baby's schedule for the day. It's in the book, and it's just so kind of weirdly severe. It's like 7 a.m. Awake the baby, 7:30 bowel movement, 7, it's just 7:45 bottle, 7, whatever. Um, and I just think to myself how, my children, we didn't do any of that. There was no schedule. I mean, how do you poop on a schedule? It's just so, it was, all of it was so bizarre. And as I took pictures of this, I again, because I was so like tied up on the page, I'd get back to my studio at Saltonstall and I just started experimenting with these photos. And when I would get stuck on the page, I'd brought my dollhouse, and I would just like, oh, I'm just going to restage these pictures in the dollhouse, because the time frame is the same. My dollhouse is from the 60s. This program ran through from like 1920 to 1970 something. And I looked at like the rugs and the background. I'm like, this is all so similar to what's in the dollhouse. And so I just started restaging those photos, and then putting them side by side on this big bulletin board that I had. And then I would get bored again on the page, and I was like, well, how am I going to put these together? And I started stitching them together with this sewing kit that was just left by another resident. And as I started to put them up in my little studio, I thought, my God, I'm doing the same techniques, the same sort of domestic techniques that they were teaching women. You know, I'm sewing, I'm like carefully thinking about these babies. I'm playing house in my dollhouse. They were playing house in this practice apartment. And it all just opened up so much for me. And I didn't write about it at the time. I formed that into a show at an art gallery first, and that was at a place called Collarworks here, with curated by the assistant curator at Mass MoCA. And as people came and looked at those, at what I'd created, people were standing around it going, "This can't be real. Is this real?" And I was like, "Oh, let me tell you, let me tell you, it's real." And they were sort of shocked. And then I thought, let me expand that artist statement that I wrote for the gallery show. And from there, it just kind of, it didn't flow, because nothing flows with me. But I began to kind of stitch together again a story of adoption through the lens of the Domicon babies and through my own personal lens. So it became really like what I consider to be the spine of the book. You know, I feel like it's almost in the middle of the book, and it pivots afterwards to kind of an examination of sexuality and desire. It goes into like a different, not voice, but a different stage of understanding adoption.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, also, I love the parallels though. Like you're sitting there sewing at Saltonstall and you're doing what the Domicon, because it was a program for domestic skills in a scientific way, right? But also you're bringing to it your history as an adoptee, your experience as a science writer, all these other things are kind of coming in. And then of course, when you created that art with these old creepy dolls, that was another way of kind of gesturing at the past. Like this, it was a really different way of seeing babies, like even just how the dolls were made. And you talk about that, you talk about proportions of the dolls. At one point you talk about the Red Riding Hood basket with the trio of creepy dolls that I gave you as a gift, right, expressing gratitude. And when I read about it in the confession chapter where you wrote, most of my dolls are creepy, some damaged, maybe that's the point. That really got me, because I remember when I started looking for antique dolls for you, was the first time I really noticed how strange old dolls are, right? Your art and this book takes the strangeness to a whole new level. Like it plays it up, but it also draws these parallels, right? Your own motherhood experience versus, the science of motherhood that was
Yeah,
being taught at Cornell and all this stuff. But my question really is, what's the strangest doll in your collection, and would you be willing to show it to us?
the strangest. I don't know if I have this. I do not think dolls are creepy. I love that people do. I have dolls like that. I think that are me, that embody me. Like, of course, like the doll, I have them here because you asked me. Like the doll that was kind of a stand-in for me is
That's the
this.
cover doll.
Yeah, it's the cover girl. I don't have a name for. I mean, she's called Little Megan in the book, but my friend Elizabeth Evitz Dickinson gave me this doll, and she was from her mother's collection, and her mother spent a year by herself in hospitalized for polio.
Oof.
Yeah, and so when I opened this box of dolls, and there are a bunch of them, and they're awesome. They're like, some have no heads, some are like these. I call them the angry brides, because they're all just like, you know, I'm gonna make art out of them as well. But this one, when I opened this up, I gasped, because I feel like she looks like me when I was a baby. I mean, dolls can look like everybody. That's why the American Girl doll is so popular. You change the hair, you change the eye color, and suddenly you can project. That's the thing about dolls, you project all this stuff onto them. And one of the things I find really interesting from a feminist perspective is how much people project dirty things onto dolls. You know, like dolls are I think there's a quote in my book, dolls are dirty and they cry, or not dolls, but babies, they're dirty and they cry and whatever. But the eroticization, if that's even a word, of dolls is very much the same as the way we eroticize young girls. And that to me is the creepiest thing. And the so I kind of wanted to play on that too. Like, we're given these dolls just like Elizabeth's mom was given these dolls in it's unconscious in many ways. Like, she's given all these bride dolls. Nobody asked her, however old she was when she got polio, nobody asked her if she wanted to get married, but people, everybody assumes things. And I'm interested in that tension too about dolls. And the dolls in my work, like this one is one that I think of as me, like when I play in my dollhouse.
Oh,
She's,
I love it.
so these are from a set called the Campus Cuties, and I use them a lot in my work. And this is like a mother doll. This is a stand-in for one of the mothers in my book. But I also think she kind of looks like me too. She's got the dark hair, and a little girl painted her like.
Mm.
And so just buying these off of Etsy was really interesting. And I always like to look for the ones that were painted by, because there's an innocence to them also, even though this is a super hyper sexualized doll. She's in this little nightie. Her legs, like if she was real, her legs would be like 60 inches long. This is what we do to women. And then of course the little babies, which are just these little like peanut sized babies. And my friend again said, I want to know what it feels like to hold one of these in your hand. And when I did, Rena, I don't know if I can do it on camera. So I held it up, right? And I started thinking about the feel of it in my hand, the weight of it in my hand, the size of it. It's the size of a 3-month-old fetus,
Ooh.
right? Which is like this, that's like when they become viable. It's also like a threshold for abortion. So thinking about all those things in terms of like women's bodies, and how we are sexualized at a really young age, that, in a way. And my next project is going to be, if you don't mind.
No, go for it.
So my next project is I want to take different size dolls, and I like to think a lot about the interior lives of us as women, and what we don't show to the world, like what is shown to the world by our outward, by our bodies, by our appearance, that we're constantly judged upon, but what's inside is so rich. And so I got this doll. I got this doll off Etsy, and I think she's like, I feel like, and she's like, somebody cut her hair, a little girl pierced her ears. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut her head and open it and put like a diorama inside of like a beautiful, lush world of someone, like, here's what she's thinking. And then try to sort of cut out her body cavity into a door and do another little tiny diorama in there that like shows interior lives of women that we don't talk about much. I mean, we talk about them with each other as girlfriends, perhaps, but I think it's kind of an homage to being seen, truly being seen, rather than just being looked at, which is that very John Berger idea.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Because we went to the same MFA program, and probably because now I'm teaching graduate students, I paid particular attention to the parts of the book where you talk about the reaction people in your life had when you told them you were going to do an MFA at Bennington. It just says so much about each character when you show us these reactions. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the decision to include these little windows into the dollhouse of the characters in your narrative. And are there any you left out that, still kind of resonate with you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking that. Some of those things were really harsh to hear, like when my birth mother said, oh, I bet they just take anybody who can pay the tuition. You know, I didn't even have the framework at the time to realize how terrible that was
Hmm.
of a thing to say to your own daughter, you know. And and then I realized after rereading some things she'd given me in her journals that, you know, she'd been sent away so many times to convent school, to the guild to have me. And then what I learned was she also got into Bennington, got into like Vassar. She was really smart and she was able to like use her intelligence to get into all these great schools. And her mom said, "No, you're going you're going to this school that is run by the nuns near West Point because her dad was in the army." So she, all of this, like I can see where that terrible sort of where that comes from, right? But at the same time, it's like, whew, that was hard. And in terms of writing stuff like that, instead of me saying, "Wow, that was really hard," just putting it right there and letting that stand by itself was without any attribution, just like, here's what was said. And there were things that I left out. There were some things, you know, that siblings have said to me that were really, really very cutting. And in some cases, I had to leave those out because even though I don't mention or identify them by name or any identifying details, you know, one of my siblings said, "I don't even want you to mention sister." And so, therefore, even though I didn't identify her, I actually took out a thing that she, you know, it was like, it was a death haiku. She sent me what I call the death haiku.
The death too.
Yeah, yeah, yep. She wrote me a haiku
About death?
that it started, "Megan died tonight." Yeah,
Oh, shit.
yeah. So it's really
Man, that's
interesting to me.
awful.
I know.
That's
It's,
awful. Did
yeah.
you follow it up with a haiku of your own? Do you want to? We could workshop one right now. I could think of a couple of opening gambits.
Oh, no. But what made me what I'm really interested in is the two people that are like most opposed to me having a voice and to me having written this book are the two most closely associated to me by adoption. And
Mhm.
that's, you know, my adopted sibling and my birth mother. And um, you know, my birth mother at the very, very near the end of this, I requested anonymity, um, which I thought after getting over sort of the hurt of that, I thought, shame really is spring loaded, isn't it? You know, if 54 years on, somehow, you know, she still doesn't want to be recognized. And then there's the funny part, which is just blatantly funny. It's like I could barely find you. You know, like it took me, you know, some hard looking years to find out and to find you. So there
Yeah,
you
the
go.
world's not going to come knocking at her door because you
Not,
mentioned her in
yeah.
your memoir.
And
Yeah, totally.
exactly. And also it's, I'm sure that you tell this to your students too when you're trying to like get them to write hard things. Like it's not, it's yours, it's my story, it's not hers, it's not anyone else's story to tell. Or there's, you know, no one else has your voice. And so there were a lot of things in the lead up to this book that I had to really like personally overcome, because once you start using your voice, people get really freaked out, and therefore it freaks you out until you get a shell and, you know, a stronger framework and for doing the telling.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so in the galley copy I have, there are some photos with the caption "permission not granted." And then I imagine those are photos you kind of had to pull at the last minute. Have you developed new work for those spots, different archival photos, or is that is that sort of permission not granted space going to stand in sort of testament to that withdrawal at the last moment from
Yeah.
the family?
Yeah, those three photos were from, you know, from my birth mother, one of which was of our reunion. And, you know, she didn't give me permission to use them. And so I had to sort of come up with an artistic way of rendering that. And um, I think what I did in terms of putting that sort of flannel that looks almost like a baby blanket inside the, you know, the frame is something I reference in another essay, you know, and it's from a list of what was given to me, you know, at my christening or at, you know, a party. And my mom had listed all these things, including this little Tiffany silver frame, and that's the frame. Uh,
Oh, I see.
yeah, so it's like that piece of flannel is in that frame, and the, you know, that's the standalone. It's sort of like I feel like it makes the narrative a bit stronger, the narrative of erasure, even further, you know, that she wants to be erased from the narrative, and even from the photos, including the one of our reunion. So
Yeah, yeah. So one of the most interesting points for me was you wrote there were 10,000 children lost or abandoned at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, and
mm,
that one was never claimed, and that one child may or may not have been adopted into your biological family.
mm.
Can you go into a bit more detail about this? I love this story. I think this is so fascinating.
Oh, I'm so glad you do, because this I hope will be my next book.
Oh, oh,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Wow.
Yep, I hope well, I know that's going to be my next book, but, um, I'm calling it a nonfiction novel because I don't know how to write a novel, and this, that story, like, when my birth mother told me that story, she also said, "Oh," afterwards, I didn't say that he was at the Chicago World's Fair. I said he worked at a World's Fair, but in researching his timeline, his date of birth, and it really could only line up with this
Hmm.
story, with the Chicago World's Fair. And so I do think there's a real element of truth to this. And the fact that there was one baby left is, I'm so fascinated by this. So I'm trying to write a novel. I call it, the working title is The One, and it's going to, you know, the World's Fair, so many things converged on that Chicago World's Fair. It was like the rise of spiritualism. Feminism was like the women finally had, they had a whole section of the fair that was theirs, that was planned by them. They had a library there, they had a nursery. That's why this baby could be left there. And so I get to research all this rich material about, like, who ran that nursery, who was the librarian. Like, right now, the two main characters, are the woman who found the baby, or who I think found the baby, who happened to be um, uh, one of the nurses at the time, or one of the people who was running the nursery. And then she's good friends with the woman who runs the library. And so those are two main characters in the book. And I'm just going to let them tell me what they tell me. And then, of course, like, the baby is going to be a character, but it might be like the adult looking back, and he might be doing his own search when he realizes he'd been adopted and from where. So
Mm.
there will be a big adoption kind of narrative in there also.
I love this. I can't wait to read this. This sounds so cool. Wait and tell me, are you gonna do anything more with the erotic timepieces that figure into this book in a way? Some of the research that you did that was just really fascinating and so weird, but I think that's, the details, all these details that you collect in this book are just so rich and interesting. Do you own any erotic timepieces?
No, do you know how expensive those are? They're so expensive.
I've never looked into it. I didn't even know that they really existed until I read your book.
I know. It's a research rabbit hole. What I would love to do, and I would love to see that somehow in Playgirl with images. Like I want to pitch it to Playgirl, um, and write it in a very similar way as the book, like from this sort of feminist perspective, um, examining this. I had thought I'd pitched that to the Atlantic actually, and they really loved the essay, but they're like, I think this is a little too saucy for our platform.
You sauce pot.
I know, and I was like, they wanted me to tone it down. I'm like, but that's the whole point,
Yeah.
is no, right? So I was like, first I tried, and then I was like, this is just dumb. I'm not toning anything down.
Nor should you. Nor
Right.
should you. And that's,
Yeah.
I mean, some of the best moments of the book, right, happen because you don't tone anything down and you don't hold anything back.
Thank
And nothing is like too private and nothing is, you know, and that, but that means nothing is shameful, nothing is embarrassing. Like this is like a real story about a real woman who has a vagina, who had children, who, you know, had these experiences, who has sex, right? And writes about it and thinks about it and talks about it. And I think the more we do that, the healthier we become
yeah.
as women, but also as human beings, right? I mean, I love
I
that. I love that so much.
Thank you. I mean, let's, talk about like even female rage, like the idea that I was talking, I've become friends with Gabrielle Glazer, who just wrote that wonderful book American Baby, and we were talking, and I was like, this sort of vein of female rage that once you understand, you know what there is to be angry about, which is everything. But when I was a kid, like I didn't see my parents being upset about these things. There was no model, like no one was showing me how to be um angry with these things. Instead, they're reading us fairy tales, and you're kind of sold on that Cinderella story. Even though I will give my mom a lot of credit, she would always tell me, marriage is hard work. She was never like into that Cinderella story. Um, but that's like the diet that you get. And I think that's one of the reasons, like, I think dolls are interesting to me too, is like they're seen as something, it's a very, you get a doll as a girl and that implies motherhood, that you're going to be a mother or that you want to do that. And many women don't. And that's great. And many women do. And many women don't think about it that much. And all of those things are okay. And women do it, and then you know they adopt kids, and women adopt them, right? None of it's necessarily wrong, but yeah, there's I'm I don't know, sometimes I think about what's in that book and I'm like, fuck yeah. And then I think, oh god, my kids are going to read this. But I know, like, my stepdaughter's already, she's like, fuck yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I have my funny cat eye glasses question, which is that two women in the book wear cat eye glasses, your birth mother and Mary Gaitskill. You also wear the cat eye style, right? You're wearing them now. Would you care to comment on that choice?
On me, like, having these glasses, I never thought about it that way. Like, I never thought it was like a continuity thing until you asked that question, which is really, sometimes I will say, Rena, I look up, like, having these glasses on, I look in the mirror and I go, oh my God, I'm becoming my mother. Like, I look like, I look like her, which I think every woman probably is a universal thread, right? Um, and then I want to get different glasses sometimes. Uh, I don't know. For me, I'm just like, oh God, I found these. I've always loved the cat eyes, and I'm like, oh, they flatter my face, and these have glitter. So
When I met you, that was the first thing I said to you. We were sitting next to each other at Bennington, and I was like, "Oh, I love your glasses." Do you remember that?
yeah,
They really, I was like, "Wow, those are beautiful." Like you write in the book, jewelry for your face.
Yeah, yeah, that's what my birth mother called them, jewelry for your face. And she has all these different frames that she just, she'll wear. She'll either compliment or, her outfit or whatever. But yeah, I so I do think of that too. I'm like, I mean, I wish I had more money that I could buy cool vintage cat eyes, because I see them all the time on Instagram and I'm like, oh, I want those and I want those. Um, but it's also too, I mean, this style of frame oddly is from the 50s, 60s, right? Wasn't that the height of like this sort of cat eye, which is I just was thinking, oh my gosh, that's weird also. Same time, like, I'm wearing these glasses. And then I just love the idea, like in that essay and talking with Mary Gateskill. I mean, she's very cat-like, and I think when you describe a woman that way, there's multiple levels of meaning. For me, it was not there was no eroticism to it necessarily, but I think that men who have seen me in these glasses are like, oh, Catwoman was. I had a huge crush on her when I was a kid, and I'm like, okay, okay, thanks. I don't have a 12-inch waist, but
Oh, Megan, thank you so much for making the time to chat with me today. This has been so great, and I can't wait for the book to come out and for everyone to read it and freak out because it's so 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 good.
oh, Rena, thank you so much. I mean, my God, I think about those dolls that you gave me, and they gave me a gateway to honestly to have a conversation with Mary Gateskill, which is one of the delights. And now, like, we talk still, which I am so grateful for. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time with me. And your questions are amazing. So.